Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Mass Bio Forum on aligning financial management systems to the biotech lifecycle from pre-commercial to high growth. I'm Janet Lehman, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. And by way of background, I'm a senior audit partner at KPMG, and I'm also the firm's national leader for our early stage life sciences practice. In my role, I provide services to venture-backed and public early-stage life sciences companies, but my sweet spot and really my passion lies with taking venture-backed companies public. And joining me today are a couple of my colleagues from KPMG, Doug Baker and Rick Cimino. And guys, I know you can do a much better job introducing yourselves and describing your areas of expertise than I. So if I could, I'd like to ask you both to provide a brief introduction and then share your specialty with our audiences. And Doug, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I'm Doug Baker. I'm a partner in our finance transformation practice, which means that I address all the needs of a CFO. That leads from business process improvement to technology, but really I focus on helping make better business decisions to drive improved profitability. Amongst other things within the firm, I hold a couple of major roles, one of which is as a leader in our enterprise performance management practice, but I also lead our life sciences group for finance transformation in the Northeast.
Okay, thank you. Rick?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Rick Cimino. Very happy to have the conversation with everyone this afternoon. I'm a partner with KPMG as well. I'm based in Philadelphia. My area of focus and specialty is really around ERP, or enterprise resource planning, enabled digital transformations. My specific area of specialty is around the SAP S/4HANA solution, and my focus industry-wise is within life sciences. Life sciences have spent upwards of 30 years in this industry, leading digital transformation programs.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, guys. All right. So let's just get right into it. So life science companies today have complex businesses. They have complex finances as a result. And that's from the earliest, stages of the companies, like right up through very mature companies. And, when I think about most of these companies, they have innovative, let's say, joint ventures and alliances. They have collaborations. They have R&D arrangements. And they're doing all that while they're conducting clinical trials and managing grant relationships. All these things impact their financial planning, their reporting, and their compliance. But clearly, not all companies are equal, because our early stage companies, they're going to have different needs. They're going to have different resources than certainly our fully commercial companies that could have a couple of products on offer. So today, what we'd like to do is explore, some of the tools that Doug and Rick are deploying at their clients that both enhance and in many cases transform how companies integrate their operations with their financial planning, and in return, they're going to receive efficiencies from doing that. So let's just get into it. And we're going to start with you, Doug, with the early stage companies. So finance organizations, they go through different phases as they go from an initial startup to this fully commercial company that we had talked about. How do you think about and characterize those phases?
Yeah, I kind of break them into two categories. When companies are first started, of course, they're small and the finance organization is 1, 2, 3 people. It'll grow over time, but they fall into what I would call the manual category. We haven't yet invested in technology because there's no good reason to have done so yet. We're primarily focused on the products that we're trying to make, so we're heavily R&D focused. Over the course of time, though, the company is going to evolve. The R&D is going to start to bear fruit as we go through our various clinical trials, and we may take on different sources of funding. And so while early on, where we're mostly R&D and maybe semi-self-funded or haven't really partnered or collaborated with anyone else yet, our requirements for reporting and how much detail we have to get into are really within our own control, and we can get away with a smaller finance function. As we get into some of those partnerships, though, or we take on and we have debt covenants, or as we get into collaborations where we need to be reporting more regularly and with a broader look out, those requirements aren't as much in our control. And so we need to have a better handle on not just the actuals, but also where we're going.
Right.
Our external funding sources, they're going to want to know that we're making efficient and effective use of the assets that they've shared with us. And so we really want to make sure that we've got that capability handy.
Right. So these small early stage companies, as you said, they are, they're limited in the funds that they have, and the cash that they do have, that's needed to fuel their R&D.
That's right.
So what challenges do you find that these small organizations have then?
Yeah, there's really a couple. So the biggest challenge that we find with smaller companies, and this isn't really surprising, and it's not an indictment of anyone, it's their processes tend to be one-off and highly manual. And by one-off, I just mean we don't have documented desk procedures because there's 2 or 3 people in the organization. So we don't need them.
Right.
We've got those handful of people that know how the business runs. And if we need to go buy something, someone just goes and they buy it, right? And the finance organization gets the invoice and they pay it. And we know how to do it, so we're not as rigorous. And that's okay for a small company. But that also leads to our second possible failure point, which is if I'm relying on individuals who know how to do things, then if that person's out sick for an extended period of time or decides to leave the company, I can have a real knowledge loss or a single point of failure, if you
Right.
will, when that person's out.
Right. So how do companies address this? How do they, what would they prioritize?
Yeah, so if I think about the overall life cycle, early on, I like to joke, our number one goal early on is we got to keep people from going to jail. That's our number one
That
goal.
should be everybody's
right?
objective.
Exactly. You can't do anybody any good if you're in jail. And so we focus on the actuals early. We have to make sure that we can drive to a quality set of financial statements. Even if it's going to be manual, we want to make sure we get those right. Sometimes that means that we need a consolidation in addition to just a single legal entity. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward, and we can get away with QuickBooks or something along those lines, maybe even doing some of this in Excel. As we go through time, however, as I mentioned earlier, we need to get into a little bit more of a predictive fashion where we need to understand and be able to set budgets and know what our cash outlay is going to look like, because of course, a company that burns through all their cash isn't a company anymore. They're a former business. And so we need that ability to predict and provide guidance as to where we're going. If we need to raise more cash, as an example, that doesn't happen on zero notice. That happens with forward-looking planning. And that requires the insight that comes from a solid planning application.
Right, right. Okay, so then what should early stage companies do then?
So if you reference the slide that I've got up here on the screen, you'll see we sort of subscribe to 3 views of the world. Number 1, they need to have a forecast. Number 2, they're going to need to have a budget. And number 3, they should have the opportunity to look forward further in time and have a strategic plan. Traditionally, what that means is there's 3 individual processes that companies are going through. One is they're going to do a forecast, and we're just going to look out through the end of this calendar year. 2 is at the end of the calendar year, we're going to start to lay out a budget for next year. How much should we be spending? And then 3, as a third and standalone process that's semi-related, we're going to get into the strategic plan. But that's not really the most efficient and effective way to go about doing it. So what we're really looking for and what we believe you should be doing is we should be focusing more on what we call a rolling forecast, looking out 18 to 24 months on a monthly basis, where every month we're adding another one. As you can see on the slide, we've chosen a 21-month example. But in that 21-month example, if you stop and think that through, that means I've been looking at next year. When I'm getting ready to do a budget, I've already been looking at next year for somewhere between 6 and 9 months. So now my budget isn't an event anymore. I'm taking a ton of work out of the organization and allowing them to focus on getting a forward-looking forecast that's valid. And then once a year, I strike a line, I say, and this is what we're going to do next year. And we're going to hold ourselves accountable to that.
Cool. Okay. Well, that certainly makes sense from a business process standpoint. But so how do you go about developing the forecast?
Yeah. So in theory, what I'd love to see everyone do, even from the beginning, is I'd like to see everybody put in an enterprise grade forecast tool, something like an SAP EPM or an Oracle PBCS or an Anaplan. There's a number of them out there. That's what we'd like to see. But again, as we've talked about, we're talking early life stage companies. the funding's just not there.
Right.
That's not the right place to be putting their money. It should be going into the product. And so what we've done at KPMG is leverage some of our leading practices. And so if we flip forward a slide, we've got a pre-built Excel model that we think can help companies get started on this sooner. There's a couple advantages and some obvious disadvantages, which we'll touch on as well, but there's a couple of main advantages. One is this is built off of our leading practice target operating model. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on that right now because I know
Okay.
Rick's going to touch on it later.
Okay.
But suffice, take it at face value that if you want to know what a TOM is, you're going to have to stick around and listen to Rick. And we'll talk about what those are. But this is our leading practice model. And what we've taken is the same things that we would do for a company that was putting in one of those enterprise grade solutions.
Mhm.
We've taken all that and built it into Excel. And so we've got an Excel model then that gives you an income statement, gives you a balance sheet, gives you a statement of cash flow, allows you to focus in on those line items that are important and to manage your project expenses. So it's a simpler way for small companies because I'm a finance person at heart. I spent 10 years in industry. Excel is a finance person's best friend. We all know how it works. If there's something we don't like, we can modify it. And that's one of the great advantages. Now, the downside is it's Excel. So it lacks the controls. You're not going to find workflow or anything along those lines. But again, if you have changes over the course of time as your business continues to evolve, you go into Excel, you make the modifications at your own discretion. You don't have to hire a third party to come do it for you, and your tool evolves.
Cool. Okay. Right. So, well, what happens then after a company implements a tool like this?
Yeah. So in large regard, they go into steady state operation. So they now have the ability to forecast. Of course, we've based this assumption that they already had some way to track the actuals, because of course forecasting requires actuals, no surprise there. But we would move them into what we call our evolve mode, which is you're using the tool, you're making minor revisions. Again, this is part of why we think Excel is such a great tool early for small companies, because they can make those changes. And eventually, as the company matures, goes commercial, or becomes a public company through a SPAC or an IPO, as the needs of the business evolve, one of the big things that they now have is when it's time to go to that enterprise grade solution, your requirements are right there. You've documented them. They're in Excel.
Right.
You can hand that Excel model over and say, this is what I want to do, plus or minus, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. And so that's really how we see that model evolving. And then helping companies grow into the future before eventually they need to focus on what's the next phase in my evolution, whether it's planning or something more actuals related as the business gets more complicated.
Right. That's a great transition for companies, a great transitional type tool. Can you tell me, like, I mean, it is Excel based, so I'd assume that means that it probably takes a little less time than a more complicated system, but like, how long would you say on average it takes to implement a system like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you're looking at an enterprise grade, you're looking somewhere in the 6 to 9, maybe 12 months, depending on how complicated your requirements are. For something like this, because we've got the pre-built model, what we really need to do is more of come in and tailor it to you, understand your chart of accounts, understand your organization structure, your projects, load that in. So it works out to be more in the 8 to 12 week, less than a quarter to come in and put something like this in.
So I imagine there's some people probably thinking, oh, if it's 8 to 12 weeks, it's Excel based. Like, why wouldn't I have, one of my Excel whizzes on my team put together a model like this rather than have KPMG come in and do it?
So there's a couple answers to that. One, of course, is you could, but you'd be taking one of your people offline for the better part of 3 to 6 months to actually go build something like this.
Right.
The second answer is your person may very well be very good. This encompasses the knowledge of the entire firm. We've built this off of KPMG's assets. They're not just what does Doug think good looks like, or what does Rick think. This is the entire thinking of the firm has said, here's what good looks like as it relates to financial planning. And we've built all that in.
Awesome. Okay. So, and you have this Excel models, but so when should a company start to think about an enterprise grade system?
Yeah, so that's a tougher one to answer in terms of being a specific timeline. But what I would say is the triggering event is In most companies, it's going to be more when you've got line of sight to going commercial. A model like this can handle that, but there's a lot of possible different revenue streams,
Right.
and it gets challenging to get all of that dimensionality in. So in large regard, what I would say is this is a model that will take you up to the point where you've got a clear path that says, I'm going to go commercial. I know my products. I know my sales channels. You could start to build that into Excel here, but that's really when you need to start thinking about an enterprise grade model.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And
Certainly.
I think that's a great segue, Rick,
Mhm.
to what do companies do when they start to outgrow their business process models and
Mhm.
their IT solutions, the types that
Mhm.
Doug was just talking about.
Sure, Janet. What we typically see in the marketplace is, as companies move their way through FDA clinical trials and the various phases and stages of that and evolve themselves from pre-commercial to a commercial company, they either put together or already have in place a 3 to 5 year business plan. And that 3 to 5 year business plan has many components to it, including, what are the targeted revenue growth numbers, what are their targeted margin growth numbers, what additional products do they want to get into the FDA pipeline and get out into circulation? What geographies do they want to serve? Do they want to be domestic? Do they want to be global? If they want to be global, then which regions and countries do they want to serve? How do they want to serve those regions? Do they want to stand up a full-fledged commercial affiliate, or do they simply want to stand up sales rep offices in those countries? Do they want to employ 3PLs or third-party logistics providers, fourth-party logistics providers to handle things such as inventory management, warehouse management, transportation? Do they want to insource or outsource manufacturing? Do they want to entertain shared services? And if so, for which functions? And within which geographies do they want to employ those shared service functions? All of that typically culminates into the company's 3 to 5 year business plan. A key component here then is for the company to be able to develop a business model that will enable that 3 to 5 year business plan, a business model that we at KPMG call a target operating model. And it's critical that that target operating model be flexible and nimble such that it could ebb and flow as I progress through the realization of my 3 to 5 year business plan. And we've seen examples where a drug company would go from pre-commercial to commercial status, previously was solely employing contract manufacturing organizations or CMOs.
Right.
Part of the 3 to 5 year business plan was to stand up manufacturing facilities on their own. And so you can well imagine, using that one example, how that business model or target operating model has to be able to scale down and scale up to support that 3 to 5 year
Right.
business plan.
Right. So in that case, then what should a company be thinking about in terms of its IT solutions?
Well, what we recommend folks to do is to plan and embark on what we call digital transformation. Digital transformation to support that 3 to 5 year business plan. A digital transformation enabled by an enterprise resource planning or ERP solution. Doug alluded earlier to one component of an ERP solution around enterprise performance management, but you can well imagine a commercial company gone through trials, has their product out, their drug out in circulation. They're now going beyond the point of where an EPM solution, enterprise performance management solution, will serve their organization. They need to branch out into other processes, other functions, other geographies. So embark on a digital transformation.
Okay. And so then logically, what types of digital transformations have you seen in life sciences?
Sure. We typically see companies, as they embark on a digital transformation, take advantage of a life sciences leading industry practice target operating model. Start with the end in mind. Start with where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. Do not build your target operating model based on where you are today. It just so happens that at KPMG, we have invested and developed a specific life sciences industry target operating model based on our many years of working in this industry, based on our many years of implementing ERP, enterprise resource planning systems. And we call it KPMG Powered Enterprise for SAP S/4HANA for Life Sciences. For a variety of reasons, we've chosen to enable our life sciences target operating model on the SAP solution, their latest and greatest solution being S/4HANA.
Okay, cool. So can you tell us more about the KPMG
Sure,
solution?
absolutely. If we go to the next slide, Janet, you'll see this here on the left-hand side, the wheel on the left-hand side. The different cogs in that wheel comprise what we call the 6 layers of our target operating model. And again, all 6 layers are based on life sciences, industry-leading practices. If we start at, let's say, 1 o'clock on that wheel, one of the layers of the target operating model is around industry-leading practice business processes. If we move further clockwise, the next layer is around governance and controls. Something that's of particular importance, as what we see with a lot of pre-commercial to commercial companies in this industry is that while they may start out as privately owned or privately funded companies, ultimately at some point they look to go public. And we all know that a publicly traded company has a lot more strict and demanding governance and controls on it than a privately owned company. We move down to around 6 o'clock on the wheel. People are another component of our 6-layer target operating model. Further moving clockwise, service delivery models, performance insights and data, and then certainly last but not least, a technology layer to the target operating model to enable all 5 layers. I mean, historically, people may have seen a target operating model or a business model solely based on, people, process, technology. But, we found that adding in, governance, service delivery model, performance insights and data truly enables us to round out our 6-layer target operating model.
Mhm.
If we take a look at then the processes, staying on this slide, the leading practice business processes, we've decided to build our solution to accommodate the 5 processes on the right-hand side. So account to report to support the finance and enterprise performance management functions, order to cash for commercial operations, and that also includes indirect tax and global trade and customs. Companies certainly looking to service other regions outside of the US. Something like global trade and customs is critical. Planned inventory for manufacturing, integrated business planning for supply chain management, and then last but not least, source to pay for indirect and direct procurement. For all 5 of these functions or all 5 of these business processes, as a company looks to grow, realize the benefits of a 3 to 5 year business plan, inevitably look to service markets outside of the US, there comes a whole series of country and regional specific localizations that we have also embedded across these 5 process areas, legal, regulatory, statutory in nature, that any company that operates in certain countries with certain business processes legally has to abide to.
Right.
If we flip to the next page then, Janet, moving down onto governance, as I mentioned, we have a governance layer to the target operating model with predefined control points, access control, process control, end user security roles. Our people component has end user roles already defined with role descriptions. And then we've articulated the process, the governance, and the people component through a series of assets that we call top-down process taxonomies, process flows, all the way down to the level 5 business transaction level, as well as process maturity models. Our service delivery model helps a company to determine how they want to deliver those services, those processes as services, not only internal to their organization, but externally to their customers, their suppliers, and their partners. This gets back to the shared services concept. Do I want to stand up a shared services entity for which functions, within which geographies? Performance insights and data is a critical component here around key performance indicators and metrics. And we have predefined KPIs, key performance indicators, to enable a life sciences company to determine, how am I operating from a business performance perspective? Because again, this is not a once and done type journey with a digital transformation. I've got a 3 to 5 year plan. And so I need to be ebbing and flowing I need to be determining how am I doing from a business performance perspective? How is my digital transformation solution, in this case, SAP S/4HANA, enabling that plan and then making adjustments as I go forward. And then the last component, as I referenced before, is a pre-configured reference model. In the spirit of beginning with the end in mind, we have a pre-configured reference model for SAP S/4HANA. It's cloud-based. We suggest companies, focus their enterprise resource planning operations and solutions in the cloud. It enables them to be a little bit more agile, nimble, and it's certainly a more cost-effective solution.
Okay, thank you. That sounds like a significant undertaking,
Mhm.
Rick. And I imagine that many people in our audience are wondering, what's the timeline to implement a digital solution like this?
Certainly, and I'll, unfortunately give a typical consultant answer, but, it depends.
Yeah.
And realizing in this particular industry, there are companies of all sizes and companies with a variety of different aspirations relative to growth over that 3 to 5 year timeline. We've seen companies on the smaller side that are less complex be able to have something up and running, a component of their digital transformation, a component of that solution up and running within 12 months. Larger size companies that are more complex are choosing to deploy more business processes, maybe in more regions. So, maybe I'm further down on my 3 to 5 year plan as
Okay.
opposed to in year one. Could take, 24 plus months. But, a critical component here is to view this digital transformation not as a 0 to 12-month initiative and then I'm done, because that's not how my business plan is. My business plan is 3 to 5 years, and I need to be time phasing and dovetailing my digital transformation to the phasing and sequencing of that business plan.
What are the significant drivers that would differentiate? Well, that would put you in either like more of a 12-month bucket or a 24 to 36 month
Yep.
bucket.
Well, certainly size, scope, complexity of the organization. If I just want to focus on account to report or finance and enterprise performance management, so I'm taking one of those functions, one of those end-to-end processes, as opposed to I'm taking all 5 of them, and I need to stand that up across 30 countries,
Got it.
across 10 manufacturing facilities, integrated with 30 third-party logistics providers.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I guess maybe just in kind of wrapping up here, what do you see as the lessons learned for leading practices for a successful digital transformation?
Sure. And Janet, I mean, there is a hard and fast recipe for success and then a hard and fast recipe for failure. I mean, companies have succeeded. It's very binary with digital transformations, really regardless of industry. Recipe for success, recipe for failure. A lot of people succeed. Unfortunately, all too many people fail. Recipes for success include having a sponsor for your digital transformation and having that sponsor come from the business. Supported by IT, but coming from the business. Being able to identify and stand up business process owners for as many of those 5 processes or functions that are in the scope of your digital transformation. To have a business case to cost justify the digital transformation that is integrated with your 3 to 5 year business plan. And to have that business case not be something that you put together to justify the program, get the funding approval, and then put on a shelf. But instead, to rather have a business case that is a living and breathing document throughout the program, that you also have a value realization plan in place, which gets back to the key performance indicators we spoke about earlier, and being able to track and monitor how I'm realizing my business case benefits that are enabled by, in this case, this SAP S/4HANA solution. Certainly a focus on data, which is the lifeblood of any of these solutions. Focus on organizational process change management, training, communications. As I mentioned earlier, utilizing a life sciences industry-leading practice target operating model.
Right.
Keeping it as simple as possible at the outset, knowing that you can get more sophisticated as you grow. You can further expand the solution. And then, selecting a journey partner that has done this before successfully.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you both. You've given us a lot of food for thought here on some tools that you're utilizing. Laura, I want to turn it over to you. See, do we have any questions from the audience for Rick and Doug?
We do, and I don't know if this mic is helping, probably. So one is specifically for Doug, and I think Rick actually kind of sort of answered this, but since it's specifically for Doug, I want him to hear it. Will implementing the Excel-based model ultimately make moving to an enterprise system easier or faster?
Good question.
Yeah, so the simple answer to that is it should, yes. One of the longest parts of implementing an enterprise model, and I'll try and keep this answer as short as I can, but there's a lot of moving pieces here. Most of those enterprise grade planning models are actually blank when you get them, right? They don't come pre-configured. There's nothing in them. So you have to define exactly what you want to have happen for all of the different line items, which line items, so on and so forth. So the longest part of standing up a planning solution is actually defining how you want to plan. If you start with a robust Excel model that says, here's how I want to do it, then you're well down that path of what you want to see in your enterprise solution. So the short answer is yes. And in fact, when I go in and do enterprise planning models, one of the things I will do is model it out in Excel so people know what they're going to get as they go.
So it's almost more a step of the process that's probably going to happen anyway.
That's exactly right.
Right.
One way or the other. The difference here, I would say, is if I'm just doing an enterprise grade, I'm not creating an integrated model. I'm going to create little individual bits of how the model is going to work. Here, we've created an integrated model that works.
Got it.
And in the methodology that we employ, we have a visioning phase. And in that visioning phase, we would take the non-industrial strength ERP solution for planning and forecasting and use that as input into the visioning phase to then determine how does that then translate into the industrial strength ERP solution.
Got it. I think this is for all of you. What can early stage, basically pre-commercialization companies do to lay the foundation for this approach down the line? Like how can they prep to meet with you guys and sort of come to the table more ready?
There's probably a couple different answers there, but I'll start with the simplest one. One of the biggest challenges I see when I'm dealing with early and pre-commercial, even pre-commercial, but one of the biggest challenges I see anyway, is that they haven't left enough time to actually get the solution they need in place. So what I would say is be realistic about how long it takes to do any of this. I've given you, sort of the Excel might take a couple months, but as Rick's indicated, when you get to an ERP, that's going to take substantially longer. So leaving yourself enough time and being reasonable about when you want to engage us. If you call 3 months before you're ready to go public and say, I need an ERP, there's not a lot we can do for you. But
I think I'd also add, to Rick's comment earlier, to have a sponsor, to have somebody who's going to drive the process. I would say that's also a critically important part.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the more planning, the better. And, an early stage drug company who is, maybe does not yet have that 3 to 5 year plan together because they don't quite know if their drug is going to get through trials, to be having discussions around what is the art of the possible. What else is going on with companies in my industry that are maybe a couple years ahead of me? And it gets back to some of those components that I talked about earlier that will eventually be in their 3 to 5 year business plan. But to begin to think through some of those options now, I'm a firm advocate of let's begin with the end in mind. Let me not just sort of make this up as I go along. I might not know exactly where I want to be in 5 years, but I think it behooves them, if they're in their very early stages, to at least know what are some of the options of where I want to be in 5 years.
I think that's a great point. I'm going to jump on top of that one just to make it. The other thing I would say is don't wait until you think you're ready to spend money to call us. We're happy to come in and have a conversation about the art of the possible long before you're ready to say, yeah, I want to sign a check. That's not a requirement for us to want to talk to you. So don't be bashful.
That's awesome. It's exactly what I was going to say. Like, it's never too soon to start planning, right? Another one, when should a company, and same concept, when should a company consider enterprise grade configured system? Like what stage is that consideration make sense?
I mean, I think, as they, are working their way through the various phases and stages of trials, they need to begin to think about it because, as Doug mentioned, it's going to come up on you sooner than later. You can always have a plan in place for your digital transformation, but then not start it until you get further down that clinical trial stages. The sooner the better to have that plan in place, because time's going to go by rapidly, and as soon as you get that first drug out into the marketplace, you're going to want to get the second through nth. You're going to want to move into other markets, and it's not that simple just to be servicing the U.S. market and then overnight say, I want to go into Europe.
I will tell you that I often see that early stage companies, let's say they're phase 2 clinical trials, they go public, and typically what I'll see is they'll put in an ERP system after they go public. They just got the resources, the funding from the IPO. So that's typically the first thing they do in the first year after they've gone public, and it sets them up for when they are in phase 3 and preparing for to launch their drug.
All right, this one is a little loaded, at least to me. So I'm excited. Maybe. At what point is it okay for a founder or CEO to start taking a salary?
Give that to Janet.
Yep. That was definitely for you.
I see founders, CEOs, they take a salary, certainly from their Series A, they're taking a salary, you're making a contribution, it's important that it's reflected, right? So, and we typically don't get involved with companies until they've done their Series A funding, but I would say certainly with your Series A, you should be taking a salary.
That's not part of our target operating model, unfortunately.
I don't think it specifies that.
That's not a layer of our TOM.
Well, it was a good question then.
I know.
Yeah. So last question. I think we have about time for one more. So most large companies tend to plan by department. Why isn't that a part of your model?
So there are compromises in all of life and especially in business. One of the compromises when you're planning in Excel is that it's not a database. It's Excel. I don't know how else to characterize it. So you can only have a certain number of dimensions, if you will, or sets of intersections that all have to play together and have that logically make sense. So small companies tend not to be as departmentally focused. Again, the finance organization might be a person or two, or maybe it's a half a dozen, but there's not enough that I need to be able to do comparisons of finance in one location versus finance in another versus finance in a third. So the departmental component is less relevant, coupled with Excel just isn't good at it. That's one of the big differences when you get into that enterprise grade. They are databases. They handle multiple additional intersections. You can have product, you can have customer. You can get all of this different granularity that's relevant that Excel would just crash. And I say that not that I want to admit that we've tried it in the past, but trust me, it just doesn't work very well.
Yes.
What are the expectations of business process owners
Mhm.
looking to implement it here?
Good, very good question. I mean, as I mentioned in the introduction, I've been doing this upwards of, more than 30 years. I think I said 30 years in the introduction, pushing 40 years. On every digital transformation program I've been part of, I would say the process owner has been historically the most critical role on that program. And the stronger the process owner, the higher probability of success. And then obviously vice versa. The role or the expectation is that he or she is the decision maker for that particular end-to-end process or function, that he or she is responsible for the business case portion, enabling that end-to-end process or function, and that they are, if you will, truly the process owner. And then, as companies get larger and more complex, we certainly see, drug companies that are 30, 40 billion in annual revenue, having regional process owners. And then those regional process owners would roll up into a global process owner. And so it truly is, as the role states, an owner of that process throughout the digital transformation. He or she needs to be empowered to make decisions, supported by the journey partner for that particular function in support of that end-to-end process. need to have the respect and confidence of the organization, as small as the organization may be, or as large as the organization may be.
I think I'll just jump in with one additional thought on that, which is, and post-launch, that's the person that's responsible for approving any changes to the process. Once you get the technology in place and the business process instantiated and everybody's executing, that's not the end of the journey. Your business is going to continue to evolve, and we want to continue to make improvements. And that business process owner is the person that's that single point of approval to say, and here's how we're going to make it better. Yes, I agree, or no, I don't.
And if you look at, what I was saying earlier around a 3 to 5 year business plan, I mean, a company may embark on a digital transformation, and that could be in a series of phases and waves. And so there may be a component that they take live within 12 months, but they're not done with their transformation because they still have multiple years left having their business plan come to fruition. And so it truly is in the spirit of continuous improvement. It's in the spirit of going through maybe an initial wave 1, and then, taking a little break, and then starting a wave 2, a wave 3, a wave 4, adding more capability to support my business as I get more, complex and get larger. So it is a very critical role on any digital transformation.
Those are all the questions.
Good.
But we have like a minute of any closing thoughts.
I mean, just to reiterate, try to begin with the end in mind, as many options of the end as possible, and then work your way back. It's never too early to begin to have the discussions. It's never too early to plan. Doesn't mean that you have to begin executing on your plan, but it's never too early to lay out, a digital transformation roadmap to support your 3 to 5 year business plan.
I'm not sure I have a whole lot more to add. That's a great comment. I'll give you a slightly different spin is when you're implementing and thinking about what you're going to put in place. The end is your reporting and your KPIs. So think about what it is you want out to manage your business first and foremost. Everything else around it, the technology, the processes, and the governance, that's all there to get you the reporting. We're not doing this for fun. We're doing this to manage the business. I
mean, it's one thing to be able to automate and track my purchase orders, my production orders, my customer sales orders, my shipments. That's great, and that's what I need to support the day-to-day operations. But the value comes in being able to report out on how is my business operating.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both for presenting here today, and I want to also thank Mass Bio for hosting this event.
Thank you, Mass Bio.
So everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.